Morning, church. We're glad that you're joining us online as well. Good to have everyone with us this morning. Mama's Day, special day. I hope you were blessed with a godly mother. I count myself blessed because I was. And I will always be thankful for the influence that she had in my life and continues to have in my life. I want to honor our mothers. If you're a mother, would you please stand? If you can, please stand. Mamas. Now, if you're a grandmother, would you please stand? If you're just a mom, would you sit down, please? Mona, you're a grandma. Now, great-grandmas. All right. Do we have any great-greats? Great-great-grandmas. We really are so deeply appreciative of our mothers. In fact, this morning I want us to spend some time talking about how, here we go again. There we go. God's love as revealed in mothers. It's fascinating, folks. When you look at things that people create, it tells you a lot about them. For instance, I think it says a whole lot about who these guys were when you look at a Norman Rockwell painting and then you look at a Salvador Dali painting. If you're familiar at all with those two artists, you're getting a peek inside those men's heads when you look at the art that they created. Incredible contrast in the lives of those men and in the art that those men produced. It's the same way when you read a novel. You have an opportunity to look inside the head of the author and get a feel for what that person is like. I believe when you look at creation, the same thing holds true. You get an opportunity to get an insight into the heart of God. I think the instinctual love found in mothers sends a very important message. It's something that's universal among all creatures. Now, I know that evolutionists argue that the reason that mothers care for their children is because if they didn't, then those children would die and that species would end. And so obviously, genetically, this information was passed on from those mothers who cared for their babies. And so they're the ones that survived, and that's why they see this today. And frankly, I think that's garbage. What caused those mamas to love in the first place? What first created that? What started that? I believe that when you look at the love of a mother, in reality, what you're looking at is the heart of our Creator. You're looking at the heart of God, and an incredibly important message is being sent when you see that. What does a mother's love tell us about the love of God? Well, first of all, I think it tells us that a mother's love is fiercely protective. When I was a teenager, it was my responsibility to take care. We'd always have around a dozen cattle at a time. A couple of milk cows, and the rest were beef cattle, mainly Herefords. Angus weren't that popular back when I was a kid. You would see some Brangus, but not very often would you see Angus. So we had basically Herefords and then a couple of milk cows. Anyway, one of the cows that we had, we called Little Mama because she wasn't a very big cow. Okay, and I had put them out on some wheat pasture. We'd put an electric fence around it, and I was going out to check on them, make sure the fence was hot, and Little Mama had just had a calf, and that calf was laying off by itself, and so I went over to check on the calf, and as I was walking up to that calf, I felt like a truck ran over me, hit me from behind. I mean, I found myself just flat in the wheat, face down, boom, couldn't figure out what in the world had hit me, and rolled over and picked myself up. And there was no longer little mama. From that point on, she was mean mama. That's what I called her. There was mean mama standing there glaring at me because I'd gotten too close to her baby. And she was consistently that way through all the calves she had. You did not get close to mean mama's calves. Mean mama would put you down, trust me. That's just built in, instinctual in a mother to protect her children. We raised pigs too when I was a kid. Always kept hogs. And after a sow would farrow, we'd put that mama pig in a pen with her baby piglets and all. And I learned real quick, you do not step in the pen if there's a bunch of baby piglets in there and you've got a mean mama sow in there. I don't know if you've ever seen, because we're not that exposed anymore to hogs, most of us, but you take a sow, if she is protecting her babies, spit's flying everywhere, her eyes are wild, she's chomping, gnashing her teeth, and she's letting you know, I'll kill you if you touch my baby. And she means it. If we wanted to mess with those baby pigs, we'd have to make sure that we put the mama sow in another pen before we got in with those pigs. Instinctually, she will protect those babies. I was out walking a while back and I saw a little bird come flying up out of the pasture out there, and she flew up, and there was a much larger bird flying over around. Obviously, she had a nest out there, and I'm not a birder, so, you know, I know what a cardinal and a blue jay are and a few other birds, but I don't know what this little bird was. But I know this. She got there, and you've seen this happen too. She chased that much larger bird right out of that pasture. She kept dive bombing it and dive bombing it and dive bombing it and just harassing that big bird until that big bird left the area, because she was not going to let that bird mess with her babies. Again, just instinctually, she is protecting her little ones. And I think about Exodus chapter 14, verses 27 and 28, where we're told, so Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and horsemen of all the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. Pharaoh made the mistake of messing with God's children. You don't mess with God's children. And when he went after them and he threatened them like he did, and obviously it was his intent either to destroy them, or the ones that he didn't destroy, bring them back to Egypt and put them back in servitude, God went, oh no, you're not. And Pharaoh found out, and Egypt found out. They'd already learned a bunch of lessons, hopefully, from the plagues, but now they find out again, you do not mess with God's family. He protected them with a fierce, protective love. At the same time, when you see the love of God as reflected in his creation, it's gentle and it's tender. You watch a mama lioness and its cubs, and I believe, don't they call a mama bear a sow as well? I think that's right. With her cubs. That bear, with one swipe of her paw, could kill any of us, couldn't she? Incredibly powerful animals. But she'll take that baby, and what will she do? She'll bat that baby around, and she'll play with that baby, and she'll never hurt that baby. She'll keep that power under control. She'll be gentle with that baby. She would kill someone who tried to get close to that baby. When I was little, if I got a bump or a bruise, it was amazing the power of a mama's kiss, wasn't it? Mama could kiss the boo-boo and it'd get better. When ours were little, our four, it was one thing for Daddy to try to comfort, but I couldn't cut it, man. I just couldn't cut it. It took Mama to comfort. Mama had to hold them. Mama had to kiss the boo-boo, and then it was okay. Okay, there's something about the gentle, tender love of a mother that's so powerful, so comforting, so beautiful. You know, I think of Matthew 11, 29 and 30. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. What's he saying? The same God who could destroy Pharaoh's army in a flood, who could wipe out 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, just like that, who could bring Egypt to its knees with the 10 plagues, is telling you and telling me, I'll care for you. I'll watch out for you. I will bless you. You can count on me. Brothers and sisters, you know from experience that we can. We can depend on his care. He does provide for his children. We see in the love of a mother the nurturing. And I would tie that in with patience as well. As daddies, I think we have a responsibility to train up our children the way they should go. But frankly, most of us are kind of limited in patience, aren't we? Whereas mamas seem to be much more, almost sometimes infinitely patient in the way that they deal with their children and training up their children and nurturing them. I watched a fascinating documentary about a mama tiger teaching her cubs to hunt. I never thought about the fact, you know, those kids have to be taught how to hunt, those cubs. And she would take those cubs out with her, and she would stalk, and they would be stalking with her and watching as she stalked. They would watch how she would approach the prey and when she would approach the prey. And she's teaching them how to hunt. When we were little, Mom would take us, there were 4 of us, we were 44 months apart, and she'd pile us all in bed right after lunch. And many of you probably had a mom who would do a similar thing, and she would read to us Brer Rabbit stories, Winnie the Pooh tales, that kind of thing. And I loved that time, loved it. Not just because of the stories, but because you're in bed with Mom, and she's nurturing, and she's sharing, telling Bible stories and reading Bible stories as well. I wouldn't take for that. In fact, one of the fondest memories I have of my mother, and I'm sure you've all got your own special memories of your moms, but one of my fondest memories of my mother is sitting at the kitchen table. Daddy worked a lot of second shifts when I was a teenager, and so, you know, when you work from 3 to 11, Daddy wouldn't be there in the evening. But sitting at the kitchen table with Mom and just talking to Mom, sometimes for hours, because when you're a teenager, you got plenty of angst, don't you? There's all kinds of issues coming up and going on. And I think about how much my mom meant to me, listening to me and giving me wonderful advice and putting a lot of things in perspective and being so patient with, sometimes I would characterize myself as a chronic whiner. And she would just listen and advise and advise. I've told you before, right before we got married, I was sitting with my mom, talking to Mom, and she said, "Now I want you to know something." She said, "You're awful young," because we were 18. She said, "You're fixing to make a commitment. You're fixing to get married. I want you to know that if you have problems with Carol's welcome to come home. You're not." And she meant it. Buddy, you're going to make it work. Okay, if you're going to make this commitment, you're going to make it work. That nurturing is invaluable. It's absolutely invaluable. It is. And once again, look at Psalm 119, verse 97, verse 104, verse 105. As the psalmist writes, "Oh, how I love your law. It is my meditation all the day. Through your precepts I get understanding. Therefore I hate every false way. Your word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. God nurtures us through His word. In a little bit, in our adult class here, I'm going to start a study of Proverbs. And I've said before, and I will repeat anytime I have the opportunity, man, I wish that every high school had a mandatory class where those students had to study Proverbs. You know, I know this separation of church and state nonsense and all this kind of stuff. We have our kids read all kinds of things that have religious undertones and things to it. It's just that when it's a Christian undertone, somehow that's a horrible thing. But you could take the Proverbs just as good advice for life, man. And it would change kids' lives. Because there is the ultimate nurturer in our God, sharing with us wisdom about how to live your life. And so many of our kids don't get any. They have no guidance. And you're sure not going to pick it up from network television or the internet. Okay? They're going to get guidance, but it's not going to be the right kind. But God nurtures His people, and the psalmist is praising Him here for the nurture that He provides for us. And lastly, the love of God, as you see it revealed in mothers, is sacrificial. Here's a picture of a mother in Africa, and she's got this bowl of porridge, and she's not eating that bowl of porridge, she's feeding it to her child. And how many times do you see exactly that kind of sacrificial love reflected in a mother? It's a beautiful, beautiful, ennobling, glorious thing. I've told this story many times, but it just had such an effect on me that I always have to share it, because to me it's the ultimate reflection of this sacrifice. I said we raised cattle when I was a kid, and we had a pasture south of the house, and we had a way that we would bring them down to the pasture, and I'd have to go down and get them and bring them back up when it was time for milking in the evening. And I'd gone down there after we'd had one of those storms like we have around here, where it rained and hailed and really, really carried on. And as I was walking through the grass to get the cattle, I came up on a bird, and it didn't fly away. Usually, of course, that mama bird's going to get and fly away if you get too close to its nest. She didn't fly away. And I got up there, and it was a little bitty, I remember she was blue, or bluish color. Not very big, but she was on that nest, and she was dead. She had spread her wings out over her eggs, and she had stayed on that nest in the hailstorm. And that hailstorm had beat her to death. But her eggs were safe underneath her. She didn't seek to get away from that hail. She let that hail literally beat her to death. But her eggs were still safe underneath her. Never forgotten that. Because that is the ultimate expression of a mother's love. She would die rather than let those eggs be broken. She would give her life to protect them. And that is the kind of love I believe that we find reflected in God's love. All of us, for the most part, I'm sure, probably have stories that we could tell about how our mothers sacrificed for us. We always had winter coats. My family was not wealthy at all, but Mom and Dad always made sure that we had winter coats that fit us. And it wasn't until I was way older that it ever dawned on me that my mama wore the same coat for probably 15 years every winter, never changed. She never got a new coat. And to this day, I could describe that coat to you. She wore it so long. It was black, and it had a beaver collar on it. And that's the coat that Mama wore year after year after year after year after year. While we were growing out of one coat into another coat, and they were buying coats for us, Mama wore that same coat. I never appreciated at the time, I do now, the sacrifice that she was making for us. That is a mother's love. And so we come to John 3:16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. And there we find what? A reflection of the ultimate love of God in his willingness to give his Son so that you and I could have forgiveness of sins, so that you and I could have life. And so God's love, as seen in mothers, reveals his love to be fiercely protective. And I don't know about you, but that comforts me. God takes very seriously watching out for us and caring for us and protecting us. And I'm sure you can look back in your life and think about the times that harm could have come your way and it didn't. And I don't know, I won't even try to identify the times when God's hand's in it and God's hand's not. But I know this, he is fiercely protective. He is gentle and he is tender. He is nurturing and he is loving with a sacrificial love. What a beautiful thing. And thank God for mothers who give us a taste, I believe, a hint of the beauty and the fullness of the love of God. If you're ready to respond to that love this morning, if we can help you in any way in your walk with the Lord, would you come while we stand and while we sing? It is time for us to begin our class, so appreciate the visiting and the fellowship, but we do need to get started. By the way, it's just now 10:30. We're going to be done by 11, and so if you wanted to hit the restaurants early, you're still going to get to. You're welcome. I didn't hear thank you, but you're welcome. I want us to begin a study this morning of the Book of Proverbs. As I said in the sermon, I really believe that it's a crying shame that Proverbs isn't given more attention than what it is, because there is a wealth of wisdom, practical wisdom, in the Book of Proverbs. Every time I read through Proverbs, something else hits me that I hadn't thought about before, some insight, some bit of wisdom. And in a time when I think more than ever, people need moral and spiritual guidance. They need grounding, they need a foundation. The Book of Proverbs serves, I believe, as an incredibly important part of that. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the Book of Proverbs, but one of the things that fascinates me about it is the book, the first 9 chapters. Okay, there's 31 chapters in Proverbs. The first 9 chapters basically are an introduction. And so almost a third of the book is an introduction. The Proverbs themselves really pick up starting in chapter 10. Not that there aren't some Proverbs in the first 9 chapters, but one of the things that I want to point out to you and that I want us to spend some time chewing on this morning and next Sunday is that when Solomon sat down and wrote this book, he spends so much time in the introduction talking about 2 main themes. And he'll hit one, and then he'll move to the other, and then he'll come back to it, and then he'll hit the other. And interspersed periodically in the first 9 chapters, you will find a few classic proverbial sections, okay? But not very many. The vast majority of the time, he's talking about 2 things. And I'm fascinated by the choices that he makes to emphasize in his introduction. First is wisdom. Okay, and we're going to talk about that this morning and his emphasis on wisdom and why that is so important. And man, it is incredibly important. But he will talk about wisdom. We'll look at this, which fascinates me. He'll personify wisdom. Okay? Not in himself, but he'll talk as if it were actually an individual out there, okay? Wisdom. The second thing that he'll emphasize, and he'll hit it hard and he'll hit it repeatedly, is sexual purity. Of all the topics that he could choose to emphasize and talk about, it's going to be wisdom and sexual purity. Now, there's no doubt in my mind, and I'm sure there's not in yours, that we live in a sex-obsessed culture. We do. I mean, it's just amazing to me. Freud would just delight if he was still alive and he could see what's going on today, because this was Freud's big thing, was that we are sexual beings and we're driven by sexual desires. And boy, I'm not saying Freud was right about a lot of things, but he hit that one dead on. And here we are 3,000 years later. And what Solomon is emphasizing 3,000 years ago is exactly what needs to be emphasized today. Because I believe that when he hits on sexual purity, he's not just talking about sexual purity. I mean, that's involved in it. But he's talking about a choice in regard to how you're going to live your life. And are you going to follow God's will in these areas or not? And man, is he going to be blunt, as we'll see, about the consequences that are involved if a person chooses to live a sexually impure life. Again, we'll hit that, look at that next week more in detail. This morning, I want us to focus on what he has to say about Sophia, Sophos, which is the Greek word from which we take wisdom or wise. When you talk about a person who is sophisticated, okay? When you talk about having sophistication, that's rooted in this Greek word, which in essence means wise in the ways of the world. And when the translators of the Greek version of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, translated here wisdom, this is what they translated it as Sophia, as being wise in the way of the world, okay? Now, when you look around the world, one of the things that really interests me is that if you're familiar at all with Oriental cultures really value wisdom. And they associate wisdom with being older. And so they also at the same time choose to venerate older folks. You know, you go back into the Old Testament, and in the law of Moses, we'll be told to venerate gray heads. And there's a lot of emphasis put in Oriental cultures on the wisdom that comes with age and on being wise and the importance of wisdom. In our culture and in our country, not so much. In fact, in many ways, quite the opposite. It's almost as if wisdom is denigrated and put down. I was a child of the 60s. I remember very clearly the 60s. And one of the things that was echoed during that time was, and you've all heard this too, don't trust anybody over how old? 30. Don't trust anybody over 30. And boy, we took that to heart. This culture did. Don't listen to anybody over 30 years of age. Wisdom is going to be found in the young. Now, there's a reason for that. And you may not be familiar with the reason. There's a cultural reason for that. And tonight, I'm going to start a series, Understanding the Woke Revolution. And I want to spend the next few weeks talking to you about why we are where we are culturally. How do we get here? Because you need to understand postmodernism. You need to understand neo-Marxism. You need to understand what's being said. Tonight I want to spend some time talking about social justice, and you need to understand what advocates of social justice mean by social justice, because I'll guarantee you they do not mean what you think they mean. They do not mean how people define it. The left has become very skilled at using words that we're comfortable with, but they're redefining those words. And so when it comes to wisdom, and when it comes to looking to older folks, and it comes to venerating age and the wisdom that goes with age, and that's pretty well gone, let me take a second and give you a little explanation of what's going on. There's been a movement, and it's several hundred years old now. It goes back, among others, to a thinker, a French thinker. Actually, he was born in Switzerland, a guy by the name of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Many of you have probably heard of Rousseau. May not know anything else, but you've heard his name. Rousseau argued that we are noble savages, that we are born with wonderful abilities and great purity and all of that, but society and culture stain us and taint us and turn us in the wrong direction. That it's culture that causes us to be selfish and inward turned. And the most noble people that you're going to find would be those folks living, for instance, in the Amazon, who have never known outside cultures and that kind of thing. They're going to be the purest of all. And so thus, the older you get, the more corrupt you get. The younger you are, the less corrupted you are. And so who do we need to listen to? We don't need to listen to the gray heads, man. They're corrupted. They've been ruined by the culture, ruined by society. They bought into all the lies. And where you need to look is to the young who are still relatively unsullied by that, and listen to what they have to say. And that has carried over into our culture. Now, there's a lot of other threads there, but that's one, and it's a very important one. And so, unfortunately, in this country, you don't hear a lot of discussion about wisdom. When we had two men run for president in their 70s. How much did you hear about wisdom? You heard about political acumen, didn't you? You heard about all kinds of other terms, but you did not hear a discussion of wisdom, because it's been denigrated. And that's a crying shame, because it is incredibly important. Through the years, I've had a number of young preachers come to me frustrated with their elders. Man, I want to do this and I want to do that, and I want us to go here and I want us to go there, and I want to start this program, that program, and my elders are kind of telling me to back off and slow down, and I'm frustrated. And so I have to sit down and tell them they're a whole lot wiser than you are. Now, you may not feel that way. You may think you're smarter than they are, and you may be smarter than they are, but you ain't wiser than they are. Wisdom comes with age and experience. Knowledge and experience. And until you've had that experience, I don't care how smart you are, you're not necessarily wise. You may be smart, but you're not necessarily wise, because it's two different things. It's one thing to have the knowledge, it's another thing to know how to use it. Another thing to apply it. And we get so impatient. I can remember as a young preacher, Carol will tell you, I'd come home, wow, I've got this wonderful idea, and they want to put it off. Yeah, and invariably, You see, here's what happens. When you live for a while, you figure something out. And that is, every decision has consequences, doesn't it? And a lot of time, those consequences are unforeseen. You don't know what's going to come out of a decision until after you make it. And so you better really think about the implications of what you're going to do and the complications that are involved in it before you approve of something and start into something. Let me give you a perfect illustration right now. We're going through it right now in our country. COVID hit us up the side of the head. The pandemic blew us out of the water. We'd never had anything like this. How are we going to react to it? What are we going to do? And the government steps in and the government says, oh, all these people, we're having all these people, we're shutting up all these people in their homes and they're out of work. And man, I understand all of that. And there's horrible financial implications for people. And so what have we got to, man, we've got to pass some stimulus stuff. We've got to ensure that unemployment's going to be paid. We've got to make sure that these people are getting enough money to get by during this time because this isn't their fault. And I completely agree. It wasn't our fault. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to spend money like crazy, right? We're going to throw money out. We're going to support people. We're going to do all this. Okay, here we are now kind of on the backside of the pandemic. And what are we running into? I listened to a man who attends here was talking about a company he's familiar with up in Wisconsin. They have 50 openings, paying $18 an hour. If you just walk in off the street, they have 50 openings starting at $18 an hour. They can't fill them. On the news, over and over again, what are you hearing? That restaurants, fast food places, small businesses are screaming for help. They can't find help. Why can't they find help? Because, as this buddy of mine was saying, he said, I've calculated it out. You can sit at home, make $25 an hour, or go to work for 15. What are you going to do? Now, it's done with all good intentions. I'm not arguing with the good intentions or anything like that. But boy, nobody was thinking about down the road implications of it. And the incredible ramifications that we're facing right now, a crisis in many areas in this country as far as manufacturing goes because they can't hire people to work. Because we're paying them to sit at home. Decisions have implications. They have consequences. And sometimes when those aren't well thought out and thought through, you're going, ouch. Now, how do you learn better? Well, you say ouch a few times, don't you? Through life, I've got stung several times. I ain't going to get stung again, not in those areas. Something else may sting me, but there's some things that ain't going to sting me again. But I got stung pretty good. We sold a house when I was in Portales. And the people that bought the house assumed the note. And I was assured that's just fine. They could assume the note. About 5 years later, I get a knock on the door, and I'm being served papers that we are being sued because that house is being foreclosed on, and we're still on the note. Now, see, dumb Dan didn't hire a lawyer to have him look at that agreement to see if we were going to be on the hook if this couple that bought the house failed to pay. But we were. And it nearly bankrupted us. We dug our way out. It wasn't easy. That'll never happen to me again. I guarantee you. You live and you learn, don't you? And there's no substitute for the living part of it. That's wisdom. And wisdom comes, as Psalm is going to tell us, through a number of different venues, and I want to touch on those in this last 10 minutes because in his introduction, he's going to say, basically, here's going to be the sorts of wisdom. If you have your Bibles with you, open it to Proverbs chapter 2. And just look at verses 6, 7, and 8. He says, the Lord gives wisdom. That's capital, all caps, L-O-R-D, that's Yahweh, okay? Yahweh gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. Now I'm reading from the English Standard Version, but listen, wisdom, knowledge, understanding, upright, integrity, justice. Wow. What's he saying? God is going to show you how to live life right. He's going to direct you in the correctly moral way to walk through this life, the ethical way to walk through this life. And in the process of that, he is going to guard and protect you in all kinds of ways. And as we've talked about, it makes me ache to think about it. It really does. Frustrates me. It hurts me. How different would this world be if people just took the 10 Commandments seriously? Just followed the 10 Commandments. If they just followed 5 of the 10. Well, I don't know if I want to worship that God of yours or not. Okay, fine. How about honor your father and mother? How about don't steal? How about don't commit adultery? How about don't commit murder? How about don't covet? Can you imagine how it would transform life in this world if people just followed those 5 things? Man, we'd think we'd died and gone to heaven, wouldn't we? In comparison to where we are now. Think of all the nonsense that would be eliminated, all the fears that would go away, all the money, the trillions of dollars that we spend every year because we ignore those 5 commands. And then we pay the price. It's amazing. Where does this wisdom come from? It comes from God. He made us. He created this world, created this universe, created you, created me. Do you think He knows how it ought to work? Do you think He has a clue about how best to get through it? Would it make sense to follow His advice? When I moved to Sunset to preach there, moved from a congregation about this size to a congregation of 1,600 people. I'm diving into the deep end of the pool. I don't know how to swim in the deep end of the pool. I start calling guys who preach for big churches and saying, clue me in, help me. What do I need to know? Tell me some of the places where there are landmines that I don't need to step. Make me aware, guide me, mentor me, help me. And I had several who did, and I thank God for them because they were a tremendous help to me. They guided me early on. We all need that, don't we? When you start learning any job, I don't care what it is, man, if you have somebody who knows how to do it and do it well, and they can walk you through it and help you along, isn't that a tremendous blessing? God is going to provide that kind of guidance in every aspect of our lives if we'll just listen. That gives you a leg up, by the way. Big time. You have a far, far better chance of succeeding in this world if you'll just follow what God says. You know what I mean? The poster boy for this is Daniel. Seriously, go back and read the book of Daniel. Here's a Jew that everybody looks down on, from this little 2-bit country down on the east side of the Mediterranean that everybody walks through and nobody really pays any attention to. And he will serve as one of the most important, influential men in both the Babylonian and the Medo-Persian empires. Literally, he'll hold roles in both. Why? Because I figure out real early, this guy is a man of, he's intelligent, he's a man of integrity, we can trust him. He'll do the job. Wow. That's huge. Can somebody trust you? Are you a person of integrity? Are you going to carry through with what you did? Are you going to give him a day's... Here's Daniel. And he will move among the elite of the elite. Why? Because he follows God's word. He lives as a man of integrity. Look at chapter 4, please, verses 1 through 6. Hear, O sons of fathers, instruction, and be attentive, that you may gain insight. For I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get insight. Do not forget, do not turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she'll keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. What's another source of wisdom? Your dad? I would say your mom. Godly people. Wise people. Listen to them. They've got wisdom to share. They've been over the road, man. Maybe they've crashed and burned a couple of times and had to recover from the crash. They understand some stuff. They've been there. Listen to them. What they're telling you makes sense. It's going to give you a safe guide through life. It's going to help you to avoid making some of the same mistakes that they made. That is one of the things, I'll be honest with you, frightens me about this country right now. In the French Revolution, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, the French Revolution wanted to do away with all history and start at day zero with the revolution. Just day zero, just start over again. And other movements have been the same way. Let's just eliminate everything that's happened in the past. Let's just start from day one. Wow. Are we not, in a very real sense, trying to wipe out a bunch of our history? Do away with it as if it never existed, never happened? Do you learn from your mistakes? What if your mistakes are hidden from you? What if your mistakes are never talked about? How are you going to learn from them? You can't. One of the most important aspects of history is that we can look back and go, man, we don't want to repeat what happened in Germany prior to World War II, after World War I, where you have a demagogue like Hitler come along and step into a situation and create a monster. And we better learn what happened under Lenin, and we better learn what happened under Stalin, and we better learn what happened under Mao Zedong, and what happened under Pol Pot, and what happened under these monsters. And we're not being taught that. It's being ignored. It's not being discussed. And the fact of the matter is, these guys slaughtered hundreds of millions of people. Slaughtered them in the name of progress. And if you can't learn from history, we'll repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And so it's important that we listen to the wise, to the ones who have been there. We pay attention to what they have to say. And then finally, we're just about out of time, chapter 6, verses 6 through 11. Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. What's he saying? Look around. Look at life. Learn from life. Learn from nature. That ant works, doesn't it? That ant works to survive. Watch the squirrels. What do? They get out there and they gather up those nuts, don't they? And they bury those things up. Why? Because they want to make it through the winter. You can look at nature and learn all kinds of lessons from nature, but you've got to open your eyes and be willing to learn. And it's wise to do so. Life in general is going to teach you a lot of things. I mean, we've lived here now 15 years. I think I can say with some authority that in Oklahoma, you don't know what tomorrow holds weather-wise, do you? Here's the 10-day forecast. And they'll change that 10-day forecast every day, won't they? Well, we need to abridge this and change this, and this slowed down, this speeded up, and all this kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is, just be prepared, right? Because you don't know what's coming. That's just watching and learning. Wisdom is incredibly important. Would you bow with me, please? Father, thank you for your word, and thank you for what it teaches us about you and about your will for us. Please help us to be wise. Help us to learn from your word. May it be our guide. May it be the light that directs our steps. Help us in this week, Father, to live for you and glorify you. And God, again, thank you for our mothers. And thank you for the blessing that they are to us. And may we celebrate them today and honor them for the blessing that they are. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless.